This past week in Tennessee, I was with a number of, 250 for that matter, high school students and maybe some early college students as well. And they were coming mostly from backgrounds that aren't like this, aren't structured worship, liturgical prayer, and that kind of thing. And so we were, each night I would do music, but I would include a bit of liturgy, stuff that really y'all would be really familiar with. It would come easy to you. Always during this sort of 2-week experience that I do this every summer. I've done it for 20 years. Usually one time during the session, it's a fun thing to do to pause during worship and tell everyone to be seated and open up the floor for conversation. This is never what I would tell someone to do, but let me explain why I do it. Open up the floor to ask the students for whom this kind of worship is so different, how they like it, knowing that they're going to say, this is the weirdest thing I've ever done, right? This is not what I expected. So sure enough, that's what we did. I think it was this past Monday or Tuesday night when I opened up the floor for discussion. And so 250 students in a room sort of like this. And the first comment was, well, Josh, I feel like when you have us say the prayers on the screen, that it doesn't get to my heart. Like, I've never thought of prayer as something that I just read to God. I think of prayer as me like intimately talking with God, right? Someone else said, yeah, it almost feels like I'm not even sure what the words are going to be on the screen and who came up with those words and why should I trust them? That was another comment. I wonder if you've ever wrestled with the particulars of kind of liturgical worship and liturgical prayer. Or if you've ever noticed that for a large majority of Christians all through time and space, I mean from the very, very, very earliest days, the main way to pray was written or memorized, rote prayer like this. Now, for us in the 2020s, even in the 1950s, even before that perhaps, especially in the West, coming from America where we want to be free, right? We tell the King and Queen of England, you can't stop us, right? So that's built into our DNA. I mean, like centuries now of pioneering and going out on our own. Why would we ever want to use someone else's prayers? I wonder if you connect with that feeling at all. Here's the danger, because this comes up when we talk about the Lord's Prayer. It is the prayer of prayers. It's been called the prayer of the church. It's really the prayer that most of the prayers in this book mimic or follow, even quote at some point in multiple ways. Here's what I want to say about written prayers and using someone else's prayer. First of all, it leads us to humility, because the truth is we may not know how to speak to God. Notice that in Luke's version of the prayer, by the way, there are 2 official versions of the Lord's Prayer, and there's no prize for this, but anyone dare to guess the other version from the scriptures of the Lord's Prayer? It's not in Luke's gospel, it's in Matthew's gospel. Matthew's gospel is where we get different words, because didn't that sound a little bit unfamiliar just then in the reading from how we know it? Matthew's version of the prayer is a little more elaborate. It's for like a group setting. It's for mainly Jewish Christians, whereas Luke's version, the one that we just read, is brief, it's concise, it's a little bit more informal, and notice it comes out of the context of a conversation from Jesus to a disciple about prayer. How do we pray? So the Lord's Prayer, using Luke's version, and joining it with Matthew's, and there's actually one other ancient version from the Didache. You put all these together, and it's not hard to wonder if Jesus might have been actually quoting another prayer that they all knew, maybe even as children. So imagine these, at least those who were Jews. Imagine that maybe this is a kind of prayer that Jesus had learned growing up. In fact, there's some good scholarly work on which of the Jewish prayers from the synagogue this might actually be a version of. But from the context of a conversation, someone says to Jesus, "How do I pray?" And Jesus says, pointing to humility, "Pray like that little prayer that we learned when we were kids," right? Very simple. "Father, your name is set apart. I need bread today," that kind of thing. When we use other people's prayers, like prayers that come from this book, or frankly, any of the church, all of what we're doing today is prayer with a capital P. Even the Gloria that we just said is a prayer of praise. We are literally joining ourselves with God's church. That's why it's been called the prayer of the church. We're saying, we're admitting our need of, in this case, words. Do you realize that when you echo the words of the Lord's Prayer, you're joining in a song that's been being sung from the earliest days, even from the day that Jesus said, "Pray like this." A song began that day that we participate in every day, every time we say it. If you say the daily office from the prayer book, or even if you're a Roman Catholic or a Byzantine Orthodox Christian, you're saying the Lord's Prayer sometimes 10 times a day. You say, "Well, that's just not what I think about prayer." So here's what I would say. Maybe your definition of prayer needs to be tweaked a little bit. I think as did the students, right? Because prayer isn't so much an expression of freedom, pioneer, I'm setting out on my own, me and God, we're going to go on a, car trip around the States together. No, prayer is not that, even if it's intimate and personal and having to do with the details of your life. It is also something way bigger. It is joining in the group, the family of God. It's a family conversation that we're participating in. Prayer always is, by the way, even your most personal prayers. And how we show that is through prayers that we've used together from the beginning. Specifically, the queen of prayers, the Lord's Prayer. So the first thing I want you to see is humility in prayer. And it's humility by joining with your brothers and sisters, with the family conversation. It's also humble because it shows a reliance on God. In the Lord's Prayer, there's a reliance on God for huge things like the coming of his kingdom, and for tiny things, what may feel tiny for us in our kind of rich society, but for others, daily bread isn't tiny. We recognize that. But for us today, that the comment, "Lord, give us today our daily bread," it's the most common element of food, right? It would have been on everybody's table who was able to afford any kind of food. And maybe that was the only food they could afford. The most common elements, the smallest things, bread. God, I need bread. God, I need your kingdom to come in its fullness, and I need bread. I also need forgiveness of sins. Well, that's about the deepest thing you can imagine, right? Even as I walk around attempting to forgive other people. So it's humility with each other, and it's humility with God. The second thing I want you to notice about really all written liturgical prayers, but especially the Lord's Prayer, is something, it teaches you how to pray in that it includes something about God and something about you. That is to say, we want prayer to not only be humble, but truthful. And not only truthful, but honest. Now, hang with me, all right? So you've got humble prayer, humble with each other, humble with God, and you've got truthful prayer and honest prayer. Those are distinct. Let me show you how. Truthful prayer is the first 2 or 3 petitions from the prayer. Truthful prayer is saying exactly what reality is. What's the reality? Reality is that there is a God, God's revealed himself as Father because he has a Son. Father there doesn't mean gender so much as source, the source of life, right? The beginning. But we call God a he, and we use fatherly language because the scriptures do, but also because the Father has a Son, right? And Jesus had a mother in Mary. So there's a logical progression from that. There's just something about a father, that term, that we don't need to lose, friends. What we might need to do is work through our fatherly wounds so that we can set that word free or that concept free, or let God replace that concept, but we don't have to chuck it out, all right? So we hold on to Father. So there's a truism. Here's another truism. God's name is set apart. God himself is set apart. One of my favorite professors used to say that from the earliest days of his doctoral program, he would show up to class and his favorite professor would draw two big circles on the chalkboard, because that's what he was using, chalkboard. And one would be God and one would be us. It would be creator in one circle and creature in another. And they don't meet. God chooses to make the circles come together when he sends Jesus, but otherwise you have to start there with what's true about yourself, about the world, about space, about math, about music, about everything. We are the created and God is the creator. There's a truism. So truism 1, Father is important, source of all things. Truism 2, creator-creature distinction. Here's a third truism. We could go on. In those first few petitions, your kingdom come, your will be done, Father in heaven, your name set apart, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Let me give you a quick understanding of what's happening in that phrase. In a sense, Jesus is summarizing the entire story of the Old Testament, and then now we would say of the whole Bible. What I mean by that is from the very beginning of the Bible, there is a sense that God the Creator is building, in human terms, a kingdom. Even the word for image of God, like us being made in God's image, the word there is almost like statue. Like imagine the king made this world and then made copies of himself, image, right? People made in his image, little statues of himself, and he wanted those statues to be fruitful and multiply, to spread out over all of this creation, so that everywhere you went, you would see a statue or an emblem of that creator's power and ownership everywhere you went. That's us walking around, images of our king over his creation, showing everyone that God owns this. That's the story of the Bible kingdom from the very beginning. And it gets complicated. God's kingdom subjects rebel and so on. You know that part of the story. But so when Jesus announces, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven, we are invited to remember that God is building an unstoppable kingdom and he's using us. There is a sense in which one day, and this is when you get into all of the debates about the end days, but let's not go there. One day, in some capacity, we don't understand how or when or what that will look like, but one day the earth will in fact be filled with God's glory, or God's will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Can you imagine that day? Okay, so another truism. So prayer that's humble, prayer that's true, we always want to stay tethered to what's true. And then finally, prayer that's honest. You're saying, wait, how is honest different from true? Well, the second part of the petitions in the prayer are not so much about God and realities about God and kingdom and greatness and differentiation, but the next petitions are about daily bread and forgiveness, things that apply just to humans, just to us, right? You see, if prayer is only true about God, like just about who God is, and it doesn't bring forth the reality of our feet on the ground and the chaos and the disruption and the heartbreak and the disappointment and the confusion that we live as those creatures who are disconnected from our Creator, then how is it prayer at all? It would just be performance, right? So you see what I'm saying? Part of our prayer is, God, I'm staying tethered to all that I know is true about you and reality and life, and I'm also bringing my perspective on that reality. And sometimes, God, those things are very different. There's a verse in the hymn, This Is My Father's World, that's one of my favorites. It's the third verse, and we sing, "This is my Father's world, oh, let me never forget that though the wrong seems often so strong, God is the ruler yet." You see, there's truth in that sentence and there's honesty, right? The truth is God owns everything, God is good, God is in control, He's all-powerful. The honest part is the wrong seems often so strong that it's overwhelming sometimes. It's honest. So honesty in the Lord's Prayer is, I need bread, God. Honesty is, I need forgiveness, I'm a mess. Honesty is, I don't know how I could ever forgive this person. You're going to have to remind me how you've forgiven me. You've got humble prayer, truthful prayer, and honest prayer. Friends, I would encourage you, if you've not prayed the daily office from the prayer book, to give it a try. There are different apps online that you can find. Just type in Anglican Daily Office. And one of the things you'll notice is, in fact, how frequently you pray the Lord's Prayer. Let this prayer be for you a mantra. That's a word that often we associate with like Eastern religions, but it doesn't have to be that way. Mantras or repeated statements for human beings are just another way that we exist. Thank you, you're welcome. I'm sorry, I forgive you. Some things are important enough to be repeated, and they sink into your bones, even if they're the same words over and over. Did you know that in the Middle Ages, especially the Middle Ages, because I'm thinking of the various traditions of prayer beads that developed around the world, by the way, not just in Roman Catholicism. In the Middle Ages, two of the prayers that people prayed almost exclusively would be the Hail Mary, like all Christians, because there wasn't a Protestant Catholic divide yet, and the Lord's Prayer, Hail Mary and Lord's Prayer. It's like, how does that even make sense? Well, when they needed food, the Lord's Prayer and Hail Mary. When they needed forgiveness, the Lord's Prayer and Hail Mary. When they needed guidance, the Lord's Prayer and Hail Mary. They used the same words, even as their intention of the heart was different. Of course, they couldn't read, so this was their way of participating in the prayers of the church. And while the priest was up in front praying whatever the priest was praying, which they didn't know, of course, that's how it came to be called hocus pocus. While the priest was praying, the people would be in the pews, in the back, praying Hail Mary and Our Father over and over and over, just to be able to participate. So you see what I'm saying now, how it covers the spectrum of humble participation in the church with your brothers and sisters in a family conversation. It also acknowledges not just truth in general, but the truth of the story of the Bible, that God is a king. He's the source of all life, and his kingdom is unstoppable, and he provides for all of our needs. And also the tension of the world seems often so wrong. Lord, what do we do? I close with this quote from author Richard Rohr, who says that prayer really is the way in which human beings are able to stand in the tension of all that's true and their own honest experience. They're able to hold the tension of there is a God, he is good, he has provided for all of our needs, even in sending Jesus, and yet my world, my life, my family, my church, whatever it may be, is so broken. How do I keep these things together and not become a schizophrenic person, right? Richard Rohr would say prayer. And so I would commend to you the Lord's Prayer. Would you join me now as we say it together? Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever and ever. Amen.